So we've spoken at length about how mood influences the way we think. And here I want to go into a bit more detail on one of the studies that I've shown you sort of in passing before as evidence for the mood as information hypothesis. It is the study about how sunny versus rainy days affect our life satisfaction. And you remember this general pattern of results in this original study, which was that when the weather was not mentioned, participants reported higher life satisfaction on sunny days than on rainy days. And in other conditions, I only showed you one of them before, there was actually no evidence for a difference between sunny days and rainy days in terms of the life satisfaction that participants reported. Now, that was only one study that I very briefly introduced to you. But what I want to do now is actually talk to you about some data from follow-up experiments that try to corroborate these findings. So I have brought here data or evidence from two studies that try to use natural experiments. So rather, they correlated existing data from two surveys that take place every year anyway, and that contain a question about life satisfaction with data about the weather in the area of the respondents. So one of them was took place in Australia, the Australian Household Income Survey that has 90,000 observations over 9 years. And there, the question about life satisfaction, or the answer on life satisfaction, was correlated with weather data. And in this study, there was also this main effect of the weather, or rather the mood, on life satisfaction. So participants in cloudy weather reported lower life satisfaction than participants where the sun shone. But there was also a second replication attempt with more than 1 million observations over 5 years in the behavioral risk factor surveillance system in the US. And there was also the same thing happened. So there was also a question about life satisfaction that was included, and some researchers correlated answers in this life satisfaction response with weather data. And in this case, there was no evidence for an effect of weather, or rather mood induced by weather, on the life satisfaction ratings. And in particular, what I want to show you here is a plot that compares the size of the effect of weather or mood on reported life satisfaction. So what you see on this plot in the middle, what you see in this plot is that we have here data reported from our 3 studies. On the left, the original study by Schwartz et al. That I originally told you about in this lecture, and that we just looked at the data again in the very beginning of this segment. And then next to that, we have the reports from the 2 replications, that's what we would call that, the attempts to redo the study with the 2 big databases from Australia, that's in the middle, and from the US, that would be on the right. And you can see the sample sizes that are printed in the bottom of the plot. So the original study had 28 participants that took part, the Australia study more than 90,000, and the US study more than 1 million participants. Now, what is in this plot? What you can see here is the effect size. Now, what is an effect size? An effect size is a measure for how big an effect is. So if we talk about the difference in life satisfaction between people asked on a sunny day and people asked on a day with clouds, the effect size would tell us something about how far apart the answers of these 2 groups are. So how big is the difference between these 2 groups? And you can see that in the original study, the effect size as in terms of Cohen's d, that's just the measure that we use for it, it's actually really big, right? It's about 1. And usually when we run a power analysis, for instance, as you will for your bachelor's thesis at Tilburg University, you would say that Cohen's d of about 0.5 is already like it's already sizable, right? Often we find effect sizes that are, or we're interested in effect sizes that are even smaller than that. But 0.1, Cohen's d of 1 is actually quite big. But what you can also see is that the confidence interval is actually really large as well. So if we were to rerun the study again and again and again and again and again, the confidence interval tells us what the range is in which the true value of the mean usually would actually fall in if we were to rerun this experiment tons of times. And here you can see that our estimate is not very precise of the effect size, but it could be 1, it could also be 1.5. So there's a lot of wiggle room for where exactly our effect size would clock in. What we see, however, in the two replications is, first of all, you really have to squint to be able to see that there even is an effect size estimate. And you can see that in replication 1, it is just above 0. So there is an effect, but it was tiny. And in replication 2, you can see that the confidence interval also includes 0. So that means there is no evidence for an effect in the replication number 2. So the interesting bit here is that the original study with very, very few participants found a huge effect, more than 100 times larger than the effect that was obtained in the one replication that showed a significant effect. So that means we can't rule out the possibility that perhaps the original result here doesn't hold up. And there are a number of reasons for why that might be the case. However, there are also some problems with the replication attempts, right? Even though in the replication attempt of the US data, it shows that no weather effects emerged, this does not necessarily mean that weather effects of life satisfaction judgments cannot occur. And that doesn't rule out that, you know, the broader principles identified by these original researchers might actually be true. So the absence of evidence is not evidence for the absence of the effect. Right? So we might have just missed the effect, and it might actually exist, just not in this sample. And we also can't really rule out the possibility that people who were available to participate in the study actually differed depending on whether the weather was good or bad. So maybe happy people are more likely to be outside on a day that is sunny, and or on a day that is not cold and rainy. So it could be that the effects were not found in the replication studies because there is actually some selection bias in who was available to take part in these household surveys. So even though the original effect might be shaky, we are also not quite sure if it is there or not. At least the evidence that we do have from these two replications isn't enough to rule it out that it exists, right? But these two replications, they call into question whether the effect really looks the way that it was presented originally, or at least it raises questions for, you know, what else should we do? Should we perhaps rerun this experiment again and see if we try it another time with a larger sample size, more than n equals 28? Maybe that would mean that we can find out more about whether mood due to the weather actually influences how satisfied people are with their life. So this is the takeaway for everyone who is listening to this, because they are part of my lecture at Tilburg University. You will get to talk more about this question of what to do with, you know, conflicting findings that have to do with mood and social cognition. And in particular, we will do this in the work group meetings. So for more debatable things about mood, go to the work group. This will be the place to discuss how we might be able to identify findings that could potentially be problematic and that would warrant some future research.